I'm Jessica Wilson, and you're listening to Making It Awkward. Welcome back. Thanks so much to those of you who have rated the show, and a special thanks to Dina Love for the Apple Podcast review. Today, I welcome the dynamic duo formerly known as Food Heaven, who are now the CEOs of Diabetes Digital. Here's a quick rundown of terms we'll use. Hemoglobin A1C is a blood test that estimates an average blood sugar over the last 2 to 3 months. 6.5% and up is considered diabetes. We discuss fasting blood sugar, and 70 to 99 is what's considered to be within range. And we use the abbreviation CGM for constant glucose monitor. Now, when I'm feeling sassy about how the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries talk about diabetes and prediabetes in such extreme ways, I will say that everyone who doesn't have a diagnosis of diabetes is pre-diabetic. I say that particularly about prediabetes because it's another industry-constructed diagnosis. The American Diabetes Association, or ADA, played a large role in creating the term prediabetes and continually lowered the threshold for the diagnosis, subsequently increasing the number of people considered to be prediabetic over time. What was once prediabetes at a fasting glucose of 110 decreased to 100, and the A1C of prediabetes that was initially set at 6.1% went down to 5.7% through the advocacy of the ADA. Science magazine says that it found that the American Diabetes Association and its experts who promote aggressive treatment of prediabetes accept large amounts of funding from diabetes drug makers, and we're not surprised. We saw the same thing with BMI. With the influence from the weight cycling industry and drug companies, the BMI that is considered overweight now originally had separate metrics for men and women and was higher than it is today. Now, on to Wendy and Jess. Wendy Lopez and Jessica Jones are nationally recognized registered dietitian nutritionists and certified diabetes care and education specialists. With over a decade of clinical experience, they have helped thousands of individuals improve their relationship with food and achieve better health outcomes. Wendy and Jess are the co-founders of Diabetes Digital, an innovative platform designed to empower individuals to effectively manage and prevent diabetes through virtual nutrition counseling and digital resources. Through their previous work with Food Heaven, Wendy and Jess have made a lasting impact on nutrition and wellness, promoting healthier relationships with food and inclusive health education. The two of them did a series boasting 5 million downloads where they were thinking about pivoting from one professional path to another, which I really enjoyed. Food Heaven explored evidence-based nutrition, mental health, health at every size, intuitive eating, and body respect. And having just come out with their new platform, I knew I wanted to have them on and hear more about the journey. Here's our interview. Wendy and Jess, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
I am so excited. I remember walking the streets of San Francisco and listening to your pivot episodes. I think there were 6 of them.
We couldn't even keep up.
There were some. I was listening. I think I saw them rolling out on social media, and I jumped on the podcast to see what was up. So do you want to tell folks a bit about how you closed down a lot of what you were doing in the first place and how you made those decisions?
Yeah, I can start. So Wendy and I have been working together for a long time, like 13 years. And we kind of just stumbled into it. I was going back to school to become a dietitian, almost finished when I met Wendy. And then she decided to go back to school to become a dietitian. And in school for our community nutrition class, we had to do a project. And the project that I did for my class was, or that I kind of had a proposal for, was doing a show on public access TV. And the teacher was like, you should actually do this. And so I ended up doing it, like taking classes on how to edit. This was like back in the day when Instagram was new still. And we ended up building it to, a business that reached a lot of people and also ended up being profitable with time. But after doing it for a while, like 13 years, we were just like, okay, there's nothing wrong with this per se. Like it's still quote working and people seem to still be enjoying the podcast and brands still wanted to work with us because we did a lot of, content creation and recipe development and things like that. But we were completely burnt out and also kind of over social media. And we're just like, okay, we're feeling stuck and we had no idea what to do. And that's when we just said, okay, well, let's just go on the podcast and just kind of talk about how we're feeling. And so that's what the Pivot series started as.
Yeah. I mean, everything that Jess said, I think it was just like a few years of feeling stretched thin and also like in not really having the intention of creating a business when we started Food Heaven. It was all very organic and not thought out. So we ended up being the face of this brand. And as we were more seasoned in the space, as we became older, we're like, we don't want to be the face of a brand. We don't want to have to show up, like literally have to show up and like without Wendy and Jess, there is no Food Heaven. And that became like pretty exhausting, but we still have like this great work dynamic and we're good friends. So we're like, well, how can we create something that is apart from us, where we're not like so integrated into the brand image. But that's also scalable, because once you're the face of a brand, you can't really scale that brand because you are integral to that. And so that was kind of the challenge that we kept coming across, that we would try to separate ourselves and, try to outsource people to like do the content, because we just didn't really want to be online anymore. And we couldn't, because that was the brand that we created. And so, just in thinking about, like what we would be working on together and what this new thing would be. I mean, there were like a lot of things that went into it. That was one of the things, but also just our love for diabetes education and like just seeing the need especially in Black and Brown communities, and like just really being called to do the work that we started doing together like over 12 years ago. So it was kind of like full circle to go back to that, like to the basics, because I feel like also in the world of nutrition, I'm sure you know this, because, in like the RD world, it's like you just start hearing the same things over and over again. And I feel like the conversations after a while are just not very productive. It's like everyone's saying the same thing. And then there's like cliques and camps and like, it's very divisive in a way. Like, people hold on to their beliefs like they're part of some kind of, it's like kind of culty, I feel. So I was just like, yeah, we should go back to like why we became dietitians and kind of like disconnect from a lot of that, because we felt like we were kind of getting sucked into that too. And then it's like the people that we want to benefit the most have no idea what the hell any of these dietitians are talking about.
Yeah. I would say too, we were ready to like also walk away if that was what was best. And I think that was so helpful to just give ourselves permission to be like, listen, if we can't figure out a way to work together and do something that we truly love and feel sustainable for another 13 years or whatever, then maybe it's time to just, I don't even know what it would be. Go back to a clinic job. Cause I think back to my clinic jobs, and I've worked at clinics for like 10 years and only started working for Food Heaven and then my own private practice full time in like 2019, I think. But I had a great time, especially working with diverse populations and doing the diabetes education, doing the pre-diabetes classes, working, learning Spanish and being able to do consults in Spanish. Now I feel like I've forgotten everything, but it was great. And also working with a diverse team of providers, MAs, front desk folks. Like it was just a fun time. So I feel like we kind of wanted to get back to those roots, and we're okay just like not doing any business if it if it wasn't something that really felt like it lit us up.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me in the episodes was one, Wendy already mentioned scalable, and we can come back to that, but the social media bit of it all was just terrifying. When I look at, quote, like capital I influencers and how they make their money, like so much of it is in brand partnership and money and this and that, which already seems so unenjoyable, but the way you all described it made it seem even worse. And who knows what is happening with social media, but it seems like that was a big part of your decision to jump out of that.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I remember when our manager at the time was like, you're going to have to get on TikTok. Like my heart just like crumbled and died. And I was like, I think this is it for us. In my mind, I was like, this is not going to last that long.
Yeah.
Cause you have to keep up. It's like, it's like a never ending roller coaster. Like you have to keep up with all of the trends and all of the things that are happening. And it's like, we're like, Jess is now in her 40s. I'm in my late 30s. I'm like, what? As we continue to become older, I just don't see this happening for us. So we were like, yeah, we're going to have to start figuring out what we're going to do. It was great while it lasted.
It was fun. Yeah.
We're just trying to like slow down, be more offline. And it's just like having a life that revolves around that, where your livelihood revolves around that, is like not very good for someone who's trying to do those things, Yeah.
I can't imagine doing something for 13 years, honestly. And I'm like 42. Yeah. I'm
Right?
like, how did you ever?
I can't, I don't know how we did it for so long either. And it was funny because our managers at the time, they were just like, what's going on with y'all? Like, they're like, I don't see the motivation. I don't see any interest. I feel like they kind of stopped. And you can't, the heart doesn't lie. So it's like, I can't force it. And I really question, because there's so many of our friends who were doing amazing and they seem to still love it and like really be having a good time. For the most part. And I started questioning myself, like, am I crazy? Like, this is soul sucking to me. And not to say everything was soul sucking, because we did have a lot of amazing experiences, and it really, there were some major highlights for us. But I think when I think about the soul sucking aspect of it, it really like starts with the pandemic. Like for me, the pandemic changed the internet in a way that I just hated. And I feel like that it just became more 24 hours a day, like cycle continues. And I retreated during the pandemic, and I still have pandemic PTSD. And I feel like so many people just like leaned in to social media and to TikTok and to all the things. And I think that's for me when there was a turn and it stopped being as enjoyable as it was pre-pandemic.
Another thing that you talked about for anybody who's interested in entrepreneurship out there is definitely the scalable piece. And you already mentioned like you were the brand. And that was something that also like had me thinking about my life. Like, is anything I do scalable? I don't think so. Do I need to? What am I doing with my life? I'm in my 40s. Do I even have a plan? So yeah, I appreciated that. I think it caused more perhaps of a midlife crisis than anything, but I didn't stop thinking about it. So it's good to have that in.
I mean, I think it's something most people don't think about, because like, who is thinking about scalability? That's not something that we're talking about or that we're encouraged to explore. Yeah, exactly. So it's something that we had to learn the long and hard way, because we're like, oops, like we've been doing this for 12 years and we never
considered any of it.
We were just kind of going on the ride without being intentional about being business savvy, because this was like, we don't have these skills. We don't come from families who are business savvy and being dietitians. Like, it's definitely not something that was covered when we were in school. I don't even know that it's covered now. So I think it's good that these conversations are happening more, because it is really important. Like, now that there's more opportunities to create a life as a dietitian outside of clinical, it's great to talk to people who are entrepreneurs, who are, just doing other things to get that inspiration and see like, okay, what are things that I can do differently, you know?
Yeah.
Something that you all mentioned was definitely venture capitalist money on the pod. But right now, Wendy, what you were just saying was like, what other things were you all looking at when deciding to start your new venture?
We literally had like months and months of meetings to first figure out our strengths because again, like in doing all of this, none of that was considered at all. We were just kind of going with it. Jess was doing stuff that she shouldn't have been doing. And I was doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. Like just things that we should have outsourced or we should have swapped. But we're like, oh, we're just going to break everything even down the line. So I think initially it was just a lot of those hard conversations about our work relationship. What are our strengths? Like, what is this going to look like? And being more intentional about business. Like, how are we going to kind of redefine our work relationship? And being very clear on that because there was no intention before. And so, you know, you kind of really need that when you're starting a business that you foresee being something big. So it was months of just having those ongoing conversations after we had decided what it is that we wanted to do. And we actually got like a business coach / mentor that was helping us to just like kind of figure out what the idea would be. And it organically came to us after maybe like a month of working with this person. And we're like, oh, you know, it just like makes so much sense. Cause we were like, we were running so many ideas through our meetings, like, oh, we should do this and we should do that. And then, yeah, diabetes is something that we've both been personally impacted by. And it was just like, it just kind of clicked literally within like a week. I was like, oh, Jess, what do you think about this? Yeah, within a day, I was like, what do you think about this? And she was like, oh, well, we should actually add that. And then we just kind of kept going back and forth. And we're like, we have our idea. This is what we're doing. And we felt like very confident in it. And after that, it was like go time. We were just working nonstop after we had our idea.
Awesome. Let's get into the idea. So tell us about Diabetes Digital and also what role you all play in the company.
Yeah. So Diabetes Digital is our new business and we just launched in January of 2024. And it's essentially a virtual nutrition platform for people who have diabetes or prediabetes. And we are in 23 states right now. We're working on getting into more states and it's all just based on licensure laws. So we have to like apply to get licensure in different states. As dietitians, a big thing for us was accepting insurance because I had a private practice before and I did not accept insurance. And I was always told like, oh, don't do insurance. Like it's such a headache and blah, 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 blah. And honestly, insurance is a headache, but people want to be able to use their insurance benefits. Like it's not affordable otherwise. Like, even myself, I don't know that I would be working with a dietitian and paying out of pocket or even a therapist. Like I always go based on insurance. So I mean, why would I expect like a client to do otherwise? So we learned about insurance. We now accept most of the major insurances. And our goal is to have a place where people can feel like, because I find that typically diabetes websites or things, or even the quote meal plans or just like recipe ideas, it feels very bland.
Unseasoned.
It feels right. It feels very unseasoned. It feels very unsavory. And our goal was to make something that was culturally humble, to have a group of diverse dietitians and also have it be weight inclusive because typically with diabetes care, it is very weight normative. It's focused on trying to help people lose weight. And that doesn't align with our values. Like our values are very weight inclusive. And we know there are people who are doing things within this space, maybe not the exact everything that we're doing, but like there are people doing certain aspects of it. But we hadn't seen anyone doing like the weight inclusive, culturally humble, also like us being diabetes educators as well, and having a lot of clinical experience with diabetes. We just wanted to bring all of those things together. And for me, what I learned with my private practice in the past was I cannot do the one-on-one patient care and the business of a private practice. And I think that's where a lot of dietitians burn out because we're trying to do it all. And it's like different skill sets. Yeah. I burned out hard, like really hard from doing that and Food Heaven. And so I think this time around, it's like, okay, let me focus on one of those things, which is kind of being the CEO of the company. I don't know why I'm putting that in air quotes. Stepping into it. So kind of more of like the vision. And I mean, we both, again, do so many things because it's still like a small company. And, you know, Wendy and I both have different skill sets, but also a lot of them overlap. So yeah, so with Diabetes Digital, we're trying to just change the way that diabetes is approached and be a place where, people can feel supported, seen, and that their care is personalized based on who they are.
So I was listening to your first Diabetes Digital, just like this is what we're doing now. And it was talking about how you all would love to work with people for like a year, but like 6 months-ish minimum. Can you walk someone through like, hey, I emailed you, or, you know, I'm just starting to work with you, to like what 6 months would look like and maybe what a year would look like?
Initially, you would go through a super quick, just like intake form to figure out if you're eligible through insurance, because we also have like an affordable self-pay model if your insurance is not covering nutrition services for whatever reason. So once we figure out what your eligibility is, then from there, you would have your initial consultation with the dietitian. And, you know, typically, I think especially in clinical settings for people with diabetes, they're used to seeing someone for 15 to 20 minutes, like tops, you know, and it's very in and out. You do a dietary recall, you get some meal plans, and you're on your way. You don't really explore the deeper issues that are going on. And especially with diabetes, like there's just so much, you know, and like initially you're probably not even going to talk too much about nutrition. Like you talk about the stigma of having diabetes, like social relationships that have been impacted, mental health stuff that might be going on, you know, like all of those things. We really want to like try to create a space for people to explore that. And so our sessions are an hour for both initials and follow-ups, because we want to do the deeper work that we think is going to really be helpful in developing those lasting changes. Similar to therapy, you know, like you don't have 15-minute therapy sessions. Usually you go in and, you know, you unpack a lot of those things. And so, you know, for some people, they sign up for weekly sessions if their benefits permit or if they're able to afford it. And other people might do biweekly, you know, and then from there, we really just like follow up, because we've seen what the science says just about the benefits of having that ongoing care, and also having care that is going to be at least, I would say 3 months, but 6 months ideal, because then you can like just continue to reinforce. Cause, you know, sometimes people initially are like just super motivated and then it starts to die down, or like a life event happens that really throws them off. There's a loss. They lost their job. There's a, you know, I don't know, a divorce, like all of the life things that happen. And so, you know, we kind of just want to be with them as they navigate different life situations.
And then you all are going to have groups, right?
Yeah. So for our membership folks, we have, and I think the first one is starting in a week, a monthly support group, because when we were polling the Food Heaven community, who's not necessarily our target audience, but we knew that a lot of folks within that community most likely had like pre-diabetes or diabetes. So when we asked them what would they like to see, because that was kind of part of our research, they said the biggest thing missing was they felt like the diabetes care was not culturally inclusive, and they felt like they didn't have any support from other people who had diabetes, and especially support from diverse group of folks. So we're starting a support group with one of our dietitians who's incredible. And she actually has the lived experience of having diabetes herself. And so, she can really, you know, speak to that, relate to the patient, some of the challenges. So yeah, we hope to grow it too, and maybe do multiple support groups, or, you know, maybe support groups for different things, or different types of folks, different backgrounds, but we're starting with one. I think it'll go good.
Nice. So it sounds like this is more support, not like the diabetes groups that I, you know, led early on, which are like, this is how this one small pancake is 15 grams of carbohydrate.
Yeah.
It's very different.
No.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah. We'll answer like, you know, any day-to-day questions that come up for people. But yeah, I think it's more so meant as a way for people to connect with each other that have diabetes and talk about, like the struggles that they might have or fears and, things like that, going a little deeper. I think just in general with individual and group sessions versus like, this is a serving of carbohydrates, like we're cool to cover that, but we want it to be a little bit more than that too.
So how do you approach carbohydrates, especially in different cultures who might have gasp to carbs at a meal, which, as dietitians was just not acceptable?
Yeah, I think it's very individual. You have to like really assess what someone's medical status is. Foods have a different impact on each individual's numbers, right? You have someone that combines carbs at meals and they're not necessarily having spikes if they're balancing it with protein and fat. Whereas you might have someone that has one carb, but that one carb they're very sensitive to. And so, it causes spikes even if they're balancing it with protein. And so you really have to individualize. And the nice thing now is that insurances are covering CGMs, which is nice for a lot of people that have type 2 diabetes, depending on what insurance you have and what medications you're on and all of those things. So it's nice to have the technology because you can assess those trends to be able to make more informed decisions. But we don't like, doing blanket statements like, oh yeah, you need to cut this out or don't do this or follow by that. Cause it's like, it's just different for everyone, but yeah, if someone has an A1C, which is a marker of blood sugar, status, if it's, over 7 and they're having really carb heavy meals, then yeah, I would recommend making adjustments and adding more fiber and protein to help create more balance with their numbers and kind of experiment and see what helps. But we also know that there's so many other factors like stress and sleep and food insecurity and like all of those things. So you kind of have to look at everything,
What do you all think about the prediabetes diagnosis and like the history of it and it being very much led by, pharmaceutical companies and things like that, more so to, add another diagnosis, but then be able to prescribe medication and things? How do you approach it? How do you think about it when you're working with folks and deciding what, interventions to do?
I feel like this is something Jess and I have spoken about because I didn't even know it was like a topic of controversy until Jess brought it up to me. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, in my experience doing clinical work, most of the providers that I've worked with are not a fan of prescribing metformin, which is what's usually prescribed, I think, for someone who's recently diagnosed with diabetes, who has prediabetes. I don't see it happen very often. And with prediabetes, especially if there's hereditary risk, like if you have family members that have diabetes and you're diagnosed with prediabetes, I think it's definitely a valid diagnosis because the science shows that you are at a high risk of developing type 2, especially if you have like a parent or a close relative who has it. So I guess what does that mean? If it means that like, oh, well, that means we're going to prescribe metformin or whatever other medication, then yeah, I think that it's something worth questioning, like the validity of it all. But in my experience, I think it's more so to provide that education for preventative purposes. At least that's how I see it. I think that's where you provide that education, you provide people with resources because, and this is also very controversial. Like, is diabetes reversible? Is it in remission? Right. Currently, as per the guidelines, prediabetes is considered to be reversible. Type 2 diabetes is not, or just, type 1 diabetes too. And I think it's because when you're in the pre-diabetes range, it's a lot easier to kind of go back into that normal range than it is if you have the type 2 to go back into like a normal range and maintain yourself within the normal range. So, I feel like that continues to evolve the terms but ultimately, like, I think if your blood sugars are considered to be out of range, whether it's prediabetes or diabetes, I think regardless, there are certain guidelines that are good to be aware of to like try to balance your blood sugars a little bit better.
For prediabetes, I find that the recommendations are not any different than what, a typical dietitian visit would be. It's like eating things that, we'd recommend as dietitians and physical activity, which we would likely recommend. So something that I tend to say is unless we have diabetes, we all have pre-diabetes, and the recommendations would be, helpful for us all if we're looking at that type of language and things. But I'd love to know what you think about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think my thoughts are similar to Wendy's, where it's like, I understand the cause for pause if it's, being used to overly prescribe medications. But I do think that there are a lot of people where having a diagnosis can help motivate them to kind of take action in a way that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And I mean, I'll just use myself for an example, right? Like during the pandemic, I was more sedentary and I stopped cooking and I got diagnosed with prediabetes. And that was a motivator for me to get back to being more physically active and not in any disordered way, just like, oh, okay, that's a gentle nudge to get back to the habits that I had before that helped my blood sugars stay more stable. So I think that there's a lot of people, and at least like for me, the patients that I've worked with who have prediabetes, it can be a motivator. Having said that though, I do think that people often come in way more terrified than they need to be. And that's where it's like, okay, we gotta just take a few deep breaths. Like, this is not the end of the world. We're fine. Everything's fine. And again, like, we're just going back to the basics. And we don't have to do a crazy overhaul of anything because we know it's not going to be sustainable. And also it's not necessary. But a lot of people who have been coming in to work with Diabetes Digital, it's a lot of people of color. It's a lot of the people with prediabetes. They have a family history and they want to do what they can to make, a few potential tweaks to their eating or adding more things in, learning about vegetables, fiber, as Wendy was saying. And a lot of times it's like helping them realize that you still can eat the foods that you love. Like, you can still eat all your cultural foods, because we all know that many times doctors will just give a list of what you can have and what you can't have, which is ridiculous. And I think Diabetes Digital is also a safe space for people to feel like they can explore this without it being this like place of like fear or terror or restriction. And so that's kind of what we're aiming to do. But yeah, we totally hear, people's concerns about like the prediabetes diagnosis. And I think that our intentions with the work that we're doing is just to help people take care of themselves and live the best life that they can on their terms.
I definitely relate to the panic. I've had folks whose fasting blood sugar has been 101 who come in and are like, I have diabetes. Yeah. You certainly do not have diabetes. So many other things we can look at. Or yes, their A1C has even gone up. I've had folks whose A1C just is trending from like 5.1 to 5.2, and they're like, I need an intervention. And I'm like,
I don't. Right. And that's where it's like,
I don't think so.
Yes. Exactly.
But the narrative
and just helping people
about diabetes. And, if you're a black or brown person, like, you're just going to die of diabetes. So like, let's be hyper vigilant is something that I see on a regular basis, that just like, as we know, stress can impact our health. And I'm like, so this is not helping. Like, I understand why, because of the things that you've been told, you think you're a ticking time bomb, but like, this is not what's happening. I've had surprisingly a couple of doctors recently tell my patients, until your A1C is over 7, I'm not actually concerned, which has been surprising to me. These were both fat folks. And, in my experience, somebody goes in, especially a fat client, and they just like, first of all, even if you don't have prediabetes or diabetes, like, you're going to get it tomorrow because you're fat. Yeah. And to have that be different in 2024 was wild.
I'm
I
very
know. And
that.
It was actually the same person who sought out a doctor and was not satisfied with the level. Like, the patient was mad that the doctor was not matching their level of concern. And so went and saw like a second opinion. Same, other doctor was like, it's okay. Like, you can do the things that, any dietitian would recommend you doing, and when we have to worry about it. is when things are trending, in a over 7.0 A1C. I would love to know what you all think about the use of CGMs and how they're becoming more available and more popular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're a great tool for people that have diabetes because you can take a look at trends. And actually, we were part of a partnership with a CGM, and Jess and I trialed it.
Wow.
And we don't have prediabetes or diabetes, but it was good to have that experience of just like, even, I remember when I was doing clinical, I would do the finger pricking just, to like ease the patient and show her like, okay, this is how you do it. It's not the end of the world. It doesn't hurt too much. So we were like, oh, let's trial it and see, what this is like. And it was actually really cool to like be able to see those trends. And again, like I don't have prediabetes or diabetes, but I saw how like my blood sugars would spike with like certain foods. I still ate them anyway. I was like, oh, interesting. Like this bagel is like, just like completely zooming my glucose. And so I think for someone with diabetes, that's really helpful, right? Because even for me, I'm like, oh, this is going a little too high. And I'm like, I should probably like maybe not have this every day. Like maybe I should explore other options, which really, I encourage anyone to do to like diversify their food options, because that's just like, I think a healthy way to approach food if you're able to. But it was cool to like see those trends. So I think for someone that has diabetes, it's like nice to make those connections, like especially if you're on medication, because you might be at risk of, having hypoglycemia. And so you might be able to, like incorporate maybe like a nighttime snack if you're seeing that you're going too low at night, or like all those things. I think it's like really cool technology. And it can also help to improve communication with your provider, because you can just like upload that directly to your provider and they can see those trends versus you having to recall all of your finger sticks or like keeping them in a log. Like, I just think it makes coordination of care a lot easier. So yeah, I mean, I think if your insurance can cover it and you're able to get it, it's great. It's a great tool.
I agree. I think that for, especially in particular populations, right, with like diabetes, it can be super helpful. Also, I think that there's so many other things that impact our blood glucose, and a CGM can help people with diabetes see that clearly, where it's like, it might be stress or you might be sick or physical activity. It's like striking how big of an impact these things can have on blood glucose. And maybe you don't want to change anything about what you're eating, which is totally fair, but you want to take a walk after dinner, and like you can see in real time with the CGM how that will impact your blood glucose. So I think it makes a lot of sense to me. Knowledge is power. And instead of, these one size fits all solutions that I feel like as dietitians, when we went to school, we were taught like, it's this gram of carbs and that's it. And it has to be these things and this combination. And it's like, actually, when I did a CGM, I had a huge plate of pasta with a bunch of olive oil, and like my blood sugar was completely stable. And so if I had diabetes, and it's like, that information is going to really impact my quality of life, the medications I'm taking, like I would want to know.
I will say that I think it can get a little obsessive, as with any tracking system. So I think if it's someone that has a history of like disordered eating, they have diabetes, it could backfire. Cause I mean, just like that goes with any kind of tracker, sleep trackers. You're like, oh shit, did I sleep good? Did I not sleep good? What am I, you start like kind of spiraling. With the food trackers, with the this and the that, especially because blood glucose is so closely tied with food intake. So, I think I think it's great just for like informational purposes and to make some adjustments as necessary. But if you know that you might get a little obsessive over it, then it might not be a good fit for you. It might actually be better to just do the finger sticks when you need it, especially if your blood sugars are what's considered to be in range. It's not like if you have an A1C of 12, then there's other things to consider. But if your A1C is below 7, then you might be okay just doing the finger sticks to get that information.
Speaking of the CGM, I did have a patient whose A1C jumped up over a couple years time, and they came in, they logged on to the Zoom to have their appointment. And we started talking about that. They were back, to taking insulin again for their diabetes and hadn't been using the CGM, but, instead of talking so much about the food, I asked what was different in their life. And they had just, gone back to work from a sabbatical and, to the same, work environment. And that's when they noticed that their blood sugar had really gone up. And at that point, I was like, what if we take, that CGM back out and see what's happening here, right? And they were totally able to relate, connect those two dots between work stress and blood sugar in a way that at the next appointment, they were not using insulin anymore. They didn't have to.
Wow.
And so in that moment, like I'm thinking as a dietitian, like if I had just like gone I need to see you for food, we need to talk about food, or had they not had the tools like the CGM for that feedback, I really see how dietitians and clinicians can just like fly forward with the nutrition stuff and how I just wouldn't have been helpful. Like focusing on food for this patient would have just like kept us in the cycle of why are these things happening? But yeah, I didn't, I was out of a job after that, which was phenomenal. Like that is my goal for people to not need me. So I know that you all are, culturally humble and thinking about all these things, but what do you think about as dietitians, like how we're so taught that food is the intervention and like we can miss other things?
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
I feel, I don't know. I almost feel like my sessions are the most helpful when we're not really talking about food, and not to say that we get outside of our scope too much, right? Because I know it's like fine lines and whatever gray areas, but at the end of the day, like my biggest question I want to get answered with the client, or, it might take months or one session to get to the root of, is like, how are you taking care of yourself? And like, what is getting in the way of you showing up for yourself? And whether that is, looking at stress or sleep, or that we're being too anxious about what we're eating, and that's having a negative impact on us. Because I think oftentimes people come to dietitians and they think like, okay, this is the diet, please. They're going to tell me everything that I need to eat. People think we're going to be super rigid and it's going to be a meal plan and we're going to just check off boxes. And I think they're often pleasantly surprised when that's not the case. And I think there are some people, right? Like where they may want help with meal planning, and that may be something that's like stressful for them, is like figuring out what to eat, and how to prep it. And then in that case, we can jump in and talk about the food. Or there might be some people where they don't know what foods have fiber. Cause I do think we take a lot of things for granted as dietitians as well. Like even my husband, he's like, I don't know what foods have fiber in them. Cause he was like saying, oh, I want to eat more fiber. And I'm like, oh, but babe, you know what has fiber? He's like, no, I don't. So we take things for granted. And I think it's kind of figuring out where the person, the patient, the client is at, what they're looking for, running it through our lens to make sure we don't feel like they're being too restrictive with things, or they're having disordered eating behaviors or habits that we might want to address, but kind of just supporting them in the growth that they want to achieve and the work they want to do. And it doesn't always have to be so black and white, like dumping education on people.
I love the support group aspect of this and the community aspect of it, because 1000% like that is, what I am advocating for my patients, to just not feel alone in whatever they're experiencing. I love the, knowledge and empowerment for sure. And all of this. Do you all ever wonder, either in your past practice or now, like perhaps the jump to diseaseify or like pathologize or problematize the stuff that's going on for people? I am always on that. Like if, of course, how I talk about things, but also in this environment of, Black and brown people, especially like being pathologized, like how, am I navigating these conversations with my clients, but also like in my practice and with myself?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely part of the conversation that we like to have with clients because of the stigma, especially with type 2 diabetes, because a lot of the information that's out there is like, well, it's something that's preventable, that, you brought upon yourself. You were eating too many donuts or whatever. And like,
Right.
like, yeah, it's like completely disregarding the complex nature of the condition. And especially, if there's a genetic component, which oftentimes there is, just like completely overlooking that. And so really just like destigmatizing the condition is really important. And also over 50% of the population has prediabetes or diabetes in the US. So it's a very significant number, and that will continue to increase. It's predicted that it's going to continue to increase. So why are we looking at it as this death sentence when, in actuality, like the recommendations for type 2 diabetes are very similar to the recommendations for prediabetes, which are very similar to the recommendations for anyone really who's trying to eat a balanced plate. And the goal in my mind is to prevent complications. That's when the problems start happening, when you start developing complications related to diabetes, because your blood sugars are spiraling, and, and oftentimes that's put front and center. Like, oh, you're going to have amputation. Oh, you're going to go blind. Yeah. All of these things, when it's like, in actuality, if your blood sugars are within range, the likelihood of that happening is very low. So, I think just kind of leading with that, normalizing things for people, and really just creating that support so that people, like their concerns are heard and validated, but also just like bringing them the science and, just like the nuance and the complexities of it all so that they feel a little more at ease.
Yeah.
Yeah. The complications.
100% agree with
that.
Yeah.
As far as the death sentence goes, for sure. Yeah. Of course, I can't let you all get out of here without asking about the Ozempic of it all. And regardless of everything else that is true about Ozempic, the impacts on diabetes is clear and profound. I'm wondering just specifically what you find your role is when people are taking Ozempic, because that is something that folks don't typically talk about and hear about.
People who have diabetes who take Ozempic, or just like in general? Okay.
Oh, great question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Woo.
Well, I ask because a lot of my patients who have type 2 can't get Ozempic because it's out of stock, because everyone else who doesn't have type 2 is now taking Ozempic. So it's become a big issue, especially in communities like the communities that I work with, where the pharmacies are small. They don't have like a huge stock supply. A lot of these people don't have the technology to do a mail order pharmacy or things like that. And they literally are not able to get the Ozempic, which is helping them, maintain their blood sugars within range. They're not able to get it because it's out of stock. So, I think Ozempic is now synonymous with weight loss. So it's very complicated because you have people with type 2 diabetes who want to take Ozempic, not because of their diabetes, but because of the weight loss. And so you have to kind of unpack a lot of these things. And then there's people who have type 2 diabetes and don't know anything about, the weight loss claims with Ozempic. And, they're open to any medication that's going to help them, with their blood sugars. So it's very complicated. I think with people who are leading with the weight loss that have type 2, that's definitely a conversation to have, because also, I think the weight loss expectation is typically very disconnected from the reality of it all. Ozempic, in my experience, and I mean, I was part of the initial rollout with Ozempic. I was working directly with the company and just learning about the mechanism and the side effects and things. It doesn't result in a significant amount of weight lost, and I think people come in with that misconception that it's like they're getting bariatric surgery, like they're going to be losing all this weight. Yeah. And I don't see it as very significant. It might be 5-10 pounds, which for someone who is not happy with their weight, they're probably going to continue to be unhappy if they've only lost 5 or 10 pounds. So it's just kind of setting expectation and having, those conversations that are usually very hard to have and that you really need to unpack over several sessions. So Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just like a lot going on with
Yeah,
Ozempic.
so much. And also, the only thing I'll add in terms of the dietitian's role is I think it's also discussing and understanding side effects with folks, because a lot of people
Yeah.
might have different side effects, GI side effects, and it might be so severe that they can't take it. And so then maybe it's a conversation where we want to loop in their doctor or their endocrinologist, and maybe they choose a different medication at that point, and understanding that you don't have to stay on something that's like making you feel miserable.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of understanding a patient's motivation, the access, because as Wendy said, I've even had patients who were getting prescribed Ozempic for diabetes and were not able to get it. And so like, that's a huge issue too. So having, just being a supportive place for our community to kind of have these conversations and with some nuance to it.
Yeah. I've definitely had folks with diabetes taking the Ozempic and, perhaps throwing up for an entire day. And then, not feeling good for 2, and then maybe being fine for the rest, and then taking the shot again. And what you were just talking about now really resonates and is applicable, because it's really about the weight loss. And it's like, it's worth it because I'm losing it. And I'm like, it's because you're not eating for 3 days.
Yeah.
And yeah, and also probably, the medication, but yeah, the it's worth it part has, doesn't come up with my blood sugar after that. It's because I'm losing weight. So definitely resonate with, the weight loss of it all. And oftentimes I find in my role when those things are going on, like people are taking Ozempic and I'm telling them to eat more food. And it just is like, why are you telling me to like reverse this weight loss or like whatever? And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. Like I can't really, provide the support that you would like me to support you with right now.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the thing that strikes me most is just how sad it is that we live in a society where people feel that pressure to lose weight, so much so that they will put up with those side effects of like throwing up all day, not being able to hold down food. I think it says more about our culture than it does about the individual. They're just trying to survive in our society. And it's like, I can understand why people would want to lose weight and take these medications. And so, yeah, that's why our goal is just to support people, hopefully try our best, like people feel like we're not judging their decisions, but just providing maybe a different perspective that maybe their doctor is not providing, where their doctor's like, this is the obvious answer. You need to take Ozempic and lose the weight. And it's like, well, I mean, do you really? Like, why? What benefit is that going to bring for you? And kind of exploring that a little bit further.
Yeah. And what are the long-term benefits here?
Too.
We don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Nobody knows.
And
no one knows.
Once you get off that Ozempic, that weight is going to go right back up. So, it's like, are you planning on always being on Ozempic, taking into account that like you can't really eat the way that you would normally eat? Cause it also affects like your stomach's ability to like empty itself normally. So like just thinking long term, like with the side effects and the stomach emptying and all these other things, like what's going to happen if you decide to come off of it? So it's,
And I blame, a lot of the celebrities too. I didn't realize, I was watching a clip of, Watch What Happens Live on Bravo. And then every single person, when they come out, it's like they've lost all this weight and they're like, what's your secret? And it's like, Andy, I'm on the shots. give you options based on what answers you choose. If you are in network with our insurance, or we think you are, then we'll do a complimentary benefits check. And we'll let you know within a day or two. We'll call your insurance company. And from there, you will be able to book a dietitian. We also offer services in Spanish as well. Our website is in Spanish also. So if people go to diabetesdigital.co/ES, if you have like a parent or grandmother, whoever or patient who speaks Spanish, you can send them that link, and we have our forms in Spanish as well. And yeah, we look forward to just serving the community, hopefully growing and bringing on more dietitians from different cultural backgrounds and different perspectives. And yeah, and we also have a podcast now. It's called the Diabetes Digital Podcast. It's an arm of Food Heaven, and that is coming out every Wednesday, where we just talk about kind of these topics, different topics within the field of diabetes, but also with our kind of weight inclusive, culturally humble, social justice lens.
That's it.
Wendy,
she covered it all. Diabetesdigital.co.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. What an honor to have two serious veterans in the field join me here. Thanks again to Wendy and Jess for coming on the show. I'll link to their website and their pivot episodes in the show notes. Did you all catch that Jess qualified her exercise by saying it wasn't in a disordered way? I've heard that from a lot of people, and I'm also hesitant to post about the exercise I do on social media or talk about it here. There are a lot of negative narratives about exercise, and I don't want people to think that I'm doing it for weight loss, prevention of weight gain, or as a moral duty. I get why exercise for many of us has been a way to punish ourselves, to prove our worthiness, to perform health, and as part of many people's eating disorders. A lot of people don't want to hear about others' exercise because of all the ways they've been told to exercise themselves. And I'm wondering if there will be a time when we can talk about exercise and not have to reassure others that it's not disordered. Next week, you'll hear the feedback episode from my interview with Dr. Blair Peters about BMI cutoffs and gender-affirming surgeries. I've gotten emails and a wonderful video recording from a listener that you'll get to hear next week. If you like this show, you can leave a rating or review. You can also subscribe to the podcast Patreon. Until next time, make it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson. You can watch this episode on YouTube and Spotify. This is a production of The Body Politic and is supported by Patreon members and the Legacy of Sacramento Upward Services. All of the social media clips you see are done by Jen Jacobs, who also edits and mixes the show.